I would say good morning. It is a zechus. Baruch Hashem to with everyone. I'm sorry that I'm not there in person, but I very much want to thank the Tech Chevra, Moshe Abramson, Jeremy Lassen, for enabling me to at least learn with you together virtually. So I also want to thank all of our sponsors. The sponsorship info will be listed in Yahrzeit Hashem in the description on the YouTube video, as well as in the podcast description as well. Thank you to all of our incredible sponsors. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Gimel 83, and we are picking up on Pei Beis 82b, about 14 lines up from the bottom, the two dots. So the Mishnah quoted as follows: Kohen sheshimish betuma. So a fascinating Mishnah. The Mishnah said that if you have a Kohen who does the avodah in a state of ritual impurity, so what's halacha? So the young Kohanim would take him out and essentially beat him up, beat him to death. A concept or an application of kanoin pogin bo, as we saw in yesterday's daf. So the Gemara says as follows: So Rav Acha bar Huna asked the following shayla from Rav Sheshes. What was the shayla? Kohen sheshimish betuma chayiv misa b'dei shamayim or ein chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. What if a Kohen does the avodah in a ritual state of impurity? He's tamei. So what's the halacha? Is he chayiv misa b'dei shamayim or not chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? What is the halacha? I'm related to nisua. So again, remember, this is Rav Acha bar Huna asking this from Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes responds. He says, "We're in the Mishnah. Kohen sheshiyesh betuma. If a Kohen did the avodah in a ritual state of impurity, ein echav HaKohen Lavine also beis din. The other Kohanim don't bring him. This is our Mishnah. Other Kohanim don't bring him to beis din. Rather, what do? Ela pirchei kahuna motzion also chutz la'azara. The young Kohanim take this Kohen who did the avodah in a state of tumah. They take him outside of the courtyard. Upotzim es mocho begizrin, and they beat him over the head with clubs. So what do you see from here? And again, if halacha l'maisa, we're making the assumption that a Kohen who does the avodah in a state of tumah is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, will be killed at the hands of heaven, then leave it alone. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu do his job. HaKadosh Baruch Hu run his world. Why do the pirchei kuna? Why do the young Kohanim have to take this guy and essentially beat him to death? So the Gemara says, Elamai eno chayiv. Rather, it must be that halacha l'maisa, a Kohen who does the avodah in a state of tumah is not chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. After all, the Gemara says, is there such a thing for an infraction that HaKodesh Baruch Hu says you're pater and we're going to make a person chayiv? So it must be that he's not chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Incredible. Is that true? Is that true? That just because Hashem says you're pater, we don't exact punishment from such an individual? What about the following case? So again, we just saw this in Shabbos' daf. If somebody went ahead and violated prohibitions multiple times, and he's chayiv malchus, so what do we do after a certain number of times? We put him in the kippah, right? We put him in the cell. Remember again, the cell that's small, that he can't sit down, he can't stretch out. We put him in the cell, and ultimately again feed him a little bit of bread with water and then barley, and he dies. So the Gemara says, Rachmana patre va'ana katlinale. Here's a perfect case. If you were to bring the guy to beis din, what would beis din do to this individual? Nothing. So here's the case of where HaKodesh Baruch Hu says the person is pater, and yet we still take the law into our own hands. The Gemara says, no, it's not a good raya, because remember, Hamar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Reish Lakish, b'malchus shal krisos askinon, de gavra bar kitalu. No, remember how we defined that case. What case of malchus is that? This is a person who committed multiple acts of kares, or I should say, he violated the same kares prohibition multiple times. Now for kares, beis din doesn't execute the person, but beis din does give malchus, so such a person is deserving of death. Remember again, the Gemara said, and clearly the fact that he's a repeat offender indicates that he doesn't value his life, so we just expedite the process of his death. So what about the case? And yeah, also Shabbos is Mishnah. What about the guy who steals a kli sharis, a service utensil? So again, the Mishnah said, "Kanai pogimo." We could kill such an individual. Hamar Yehuda. So again, see, here's a perfect example. If you would bring the guy to beis din for stealing a kli sharis, so what would they do to him? All right, probably like any other case of theft, pay back what you stole and move on. But yet again, we kill the guy, or kanoin would kill the guy. So what do you see from here? That even in a case where someone is technically exempt by HaKodesh Baruch Hu or by beis din, we will still, or by HaKodesh Baruch Hu, we'll still go ahead and kill him. Umar says, no. Amar Yehuda b'kli sharis askinan v'ramiza lo yavo levaros kibola es HaKodesh v'meisu. Now remember again, that case was different because remember they based it on a pasuk. Remember again, it was an interesting interpretation of the pasuk. We're talking about a service utensil based on mikdash, and they have a unique drasha. That was Shabbos' daf. What about the guy who curses with sorcery? So remember again, also kano in poginbo. So here's an example. If you bring him to court won't do anything. Yet we still kill this guy, right? A kano, you could kill this guy. Hatana of Yosef, Yake kosim es kosmo, demechse kimevarich es Hashem. No. That's the case. Remember, the way we define that case is it has the appearance that such an individual is actually cursing the Ribono Shel Olam. That's why we could deal with them in such a severe fashion. I have habolas akusis. What about the case of bolas akusis? Right? What about a man who has relations with a non-Jewish woman? So again, remember, midar, I see if you bring the guy to Beis Din, okay, maybe it's a lav. But lamaisa, kano in poginbo. So here's an example of where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, quote unquote, exempts the person, and yet we kill him anyway. To which the Gemara says, no. Remember, ha'akarya l'Rav Kana b'chalmei va'ad karei Rav ligmari. So remember again, that's where they asked the question to Rav. Rav didn't know the answer. Rav Kana had the dream. He saw the pasuk in the dream, and therefore again, this idea that you can go ahead and kill someone who went ahead and was Baal Akusis, again based on that pasuk, an interpretation of that pasuk. Also, as we saw, halacha l'Moshe misinai. All right, Tzvi. So Gemara is the kasha. So again, just to keep track of our basic fundamental question. If a Kohen does the avoda in a state of ritual impurity, is he chayiv misa b'dei shamayim or not? So remember, this was the question that Rav Acha asked from Rav Sheshes. Now Rav Sheshes responded. Rav Sheshes said the answer is obviously no. Right? The answer must be no. So in other words, he said that Allah l'maisa. I'm sorry. The answer must be yes. Because the Mishnah said that if a Kohen does the avodah in a state of tumah, then halacha l'maisa, pirchei kuna are allowed to take him out and beat him to death. Now, from Rav Shesh's perspective, the only way that would be permitted is if such a person was chayim misbidei shamayim. So then again, the pirchei kuna could almost act as the shluchei Hashem, the agents of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to carry out the death penalty. But if he's not chayim misbidei shamayim, then at the end of the day, how can you kill someone who HaKadosh Baruch Hu paters? To which now the Gemara went through all of these cases where, no, you do have cases like that, where someone technically would not be held liable in a technical, legalistic framework in Beis Din, but yet we still see that they could be liable to a death penalty. Okay? Or I should say, at least liable to death at the hands of a kanoi. Okay, the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, excuse me. So the Gemara raises the kasha. Here we go. Fascinating case. Hayotzek v'habolel v'haposes. Okay, so let's go through this. Yotzek. So this is talking about different aspects of a carbon mincha. So if a person goes ahead, we'll see exactly what this case is. Pouring oil on a mincha, that's yotzek. Bolel, ultimately again, is mixing the flour with the oil. Bolel, poses. Certain minachos would be baked off, then crushed. So the act of crushing it is called poses. Moleach, adding salt. Meinif is waving the mincha. Magish, bringing the mincha close. So what's the halacha? V'mesadres hashulchan, or one who puts the lechem upon him on the actual shulchan itself, or a meitiv es haneros, or one who arranges the candles or the oil of the menorah. V'hakometz, or one who takes the kmitza. Remember again, kmitza is the way the kohen takes the flour for the carbon mincha, the three middle fingers. V'mekabel domim b'chutz, or one who goes ahead and is mekabel domim, he receives the blood of a carbon that has been offered. If you do these things, ultimately, achamdam b'chutz, pater ve'ein chayav alehen. One is pater, and ultimately, again, not chayiv for it. Now, what is this talking about? So we'll say, so take a look at the last Rashi over here. Rashi says, b'chutz im asa achas me'elu b'chutz. So what we're talking about over here is if a person performed any of these avodos outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So that's the case. Poured oil on a mincha, mixed the mincha, broke up the pieces of the mincha, added salt to the mincha, waved the mincha, brought the mincha close, arranged the bread on the shulchan, or arranged the candles or the lights of the menorah, took a kmitza, received sacrificial blood. If you did any of these things outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you are pater. Now this is very interesting because remember again, there is a concept of shchutei chutz. What's shchutei chutz? You're not allowed to shech the carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So now the Gemara is saying over here, apparently it only applies to certain types of sacrificial service and doesn't apply to others. What's the distinction? Take a look at Rashi. Pater, this is last Rashi on Pei Beis 82b. Rashi says Pater, Telo chayiv kares ela shochet. The only thing you're chayiv if you do bachutz is shchita, is slaughtering of a sacrificial animal. Dechsev asher yishchat umala dechsev asher ya'ala ola v'zorek di'esrabi midam shava paragdat v'chol hani di'esh acharei avoda imit v'parag basra. So this is very interesting. Rashi highlights a principle. The principle is like this. Any sacrificial rite that has another sacrificial rite that follows after it, you're not chayiv for doing that bachutz. Essentially, the only thing you're chayiv for doing outside of Beis Hamikdash are concluding sacrificial rites. So a good example of that would be shchita, slaughtering an animal, right? Zrika, sprinkling the blood. So these are final rites, final actions that don't really have a corresponding follow-up action. So because of that, if you do it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you are pater. Okay, so what I said the Gemara says ve'ein chayav alein. Top of Pei Gimel. So you're not chayav. Now what are you not chayav? Lo mishum zaros. So number one, for example, let's say a Kohen did any one of these aforementioned acts outside of the Beis Hamikdash, right? He poured the oil on the mincha, he broke it up, he did all of these things. So if a non-Kohen did it outside, he would not be chayiv. Remember, normally there is an Isser Misa. If a non-Kohen does the avodah, he's chayiv Misa. So, but again, if any of these things were done bachutz, then halacha l'maaseh is not chayiv. V'lo mishum tumah. Similarly, if a Kohen did it, but he was in a state of tumah, he also wouldn't be chayiv. V'lo mishum achusar begadim. It's very interesting. Similarly, a Kohen is actually this passage parsha. A Kohen has to do the avodah wearing the requisite big day kahuna, kohanic vestments. Failure to do so, in many respects, invalidates the avodah. And also, it could be a chiyuv misa. But again, this doesn't apply to the list that we just mentioned before. V'lo mishum rachos yadayim v'raglayim. And also, again, halacha l'maaseh, normally before performing an avodah, a kohen would have to go ahead and wash his hands and his feet. Failure to do so results in liability or culpability. But again, if he didn't wash his hands and feet for any of these things that were done outside, there's no liability for that either. Okay, very interesting. And Rashi points out over here, if you look at Rashi, Lo mishum zaros, zar sha'asa achas mem bifnim, eno chayiv misa. So this is interesting, right? If a non-Kohen did any of these things inside of the Beis Hamikdash, he would not be chayiv misa. Same idea, Lo mishum tuma, Kohen tamei sheshimesh, the zaros v'shimush b'tuma mechad kra. Same idea that again, there's no din of tuma, there's no din of mechusra begadim, good. So the Gemara says as follows. Ha makter chayiv. Now, interestingly enough, what we could see from this is that if you were to do the haktara, if you were to go ahead and take the carbon and put it on and burn it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, that there would be liability for that. Take a look at Rashi. Ha makter tahavya avoda tama shein achareha avoda chayiv mishum tuma umay chayiv lav misa. So again, now the Gemara is kind of switching gears over here a little bit. So what do you see from here? That if the Kohen were to go ahead and offer up a carbon, burn it on the Mizbeach in a state of Tumah, he would be chayiv. In other words, the only time that there wasn't the din of Tumah, ultimately, again, if it was bachutz. But if it's bifnim, there would be a chiyuv. So what do you see from here? Again, come full circle, that if a Kohen does the avodah in a state of Tumah, there's a chiyuv misa. Now again, the Pashas we're talking misa b'dei shamayim. So that seems to answer the original question that Rav Acha asked at Rav Sheshes. That was our original question. If a Kohen does the avodah in a state of tumah, is he chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? And the answer seems to be a resounding yes. To which the Gemara says, "My love misa." Don't we see from here that if a Kohen goes ahead and offers up a carbon in a state of tumah, is chayiv misa? Lo ba'ashara. No. It's not an isra misa. Actually, it's a lav. It's a lav. The Gemara says, Elazar nami la'ashara. So you're going to say that if a non-Kohen does this, he also would only be in violation of a lav. Rashi says over here, Elazar nami, hadadai kinan hamaktir le'inyan zaros, tema nami delohu mechayiv ha'misveja. So the issue over here is, remember, we're grouping all of these things together. So if you're telling me now that if a Kohen offers up in a state of tumah, it's only a quote unquote only a lav, not a misas bezdin. So what does that mean? If a non-Kohen does this, it's also only a lav? Well, that can't be. V'haksiv v'hazar hakarev yumas. The pasuk says explicitly that if a non-Kohen engages in sacrificial service, again, certain forms of sacrificial service, he's put to death. To which Gemara says, you're right, hakidisa v'hakidisa. They're not treated the same. Not treated the same. Mechlal, the Gemara just makes an inference over here. Mechlal, the yotzek ubolel. Excuse me. So the Gemara says, Mechlal, the yotzek ubolel lav nami lo. So the Gemara says, well, interestingly enough, we could infer from this that ultimately, again, yotzek, remember, yotzek is the pouring of the oil, bolel is the mixing of the oil, lav namilo would also not be live. Look at Rashi. Where it says, Yosef Bola, the Kamer Maktir Lav Ba'amahu, the Isbe, Umeahu Chiyuva Mamit Yosef Bola, Amafilu Lav Lo Mechai Mishum Tuma. So apparently, again, by Yosef and Bolel, I guess there's not even a Lav by Tuma. To which the Gemara says, is that true, Vatanya? As Harli Yosef Bola Minayin, from where do we know that there is a Lav to go ahead and pour in the oil and mixing the oil into a carbon mincha if one is in a state of Tuma? Talmud Lomar, Kidoshim Yihiyu, V'lo Yichalalu. The pasuk says, "Be holy and do not profane, do not desecrate." So the Gemara says, "You're right, but that's only midrabanan." Okay, interesting. So apparently, midoraisa, there's no biblical prohibition against someone who is coming, pouring in the oil or mixing the oil into a carbon mincha, but rather again it's a drabanan, and the pasuk is an asmachta. Good. Ukras alma. Meisig Gemara is the kasha ve'elohin shebemisa. So the Brisa says over here, these are the people who are chayiv misa tamei sheshimesh. Okay, pretty explicit. A Kohen who is tamei, ultimately again who does the avodah is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. To which the Gemara says, tiyufta, enochinami, it's a refutation. It's a refutation. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, it appears that the conclusion of the Gemara is that halacha l'maisa, if a Kohen does the avodah in a state of tumah, he is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. Which now, by the way, if we take that approach, so it's interesting, if we take that approach, so then it makes sense why the Mishnah says, Kohen sheshimish betuma, ein echav kanim mavinos of a bezdin. So you can't bring him to bezdin, right? Like the Mishnah said, what are you going to bring him to bezdin for? What is bezdin going to do? There's no bezdin liability over here, but what can they do? Ela pirchei kuhuna motzian oso chutz la'azara. They could take him out and they could beat him up. Now, what's their license to do so? Because since this Kohen is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, therefore halacha l'maisa, the other Kahn could take him out and essentially beat him to death. Pretty incredible Gemara. I was supposed to say, I'll also point out over here something very interesting, another like nugget of information, that halacha l'maisa, it appears that when it comes to doing sacrificial rites and services outside of the Beis HaMikdash, at least according to the Gemara over here, I don't know, I'd have to look up how the Rambam paskins, I don't know offhand, but according to how the Gemara paskins over here, is that it's only what's called an avodah tama. Only a concluding service. What's the definition of a concluding service? A service that there's nothing that follows after it. Now the truth is, by shchita, there are services that follow after it, but shchita itself is a self-contained avodah that doesn't have a follow. There's no follow-up to shchita. So interesting enough, so again, just as an aside, one is only chayiv for shchute, for avodah b'chutz, with what we call an avodah tama, a complete avodah that doesn't really have anything following up after it. Okay, so we'll say, so now we're going to go back and really for the rest of the daf today, go back and dissect the brisa which was just stated before. Says the Gemara, Gufa, the following people are chayiv misa, and again, in this context, supposed to for today, whenever we see misa means misa b'dei shamayim. Fine. So ve'elu shebemisa ha'ochel es ha'tevel. Person goes ahead and eats tevel. Remember again, what's tevel? Tevel is untithed produce. So a person goes ahead and eats tevel. The chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Now Rashi says over here. Ha'ochel es ha'tevel kulam asnisin yalaf amikai. So again, here's what we're going to do. We're gonna go ahead and we're going to mention the list, and then we'll go back and we'll explain how we know each of these items. So number one, ha'ochel es ha'tevel. Number two, the Kohen tamei she'achol truma tahora. If a Kohen who is tamei eats truma which is ritually pure, okay, so a tamei Kohen eats truma which is tahar, mis v'dei shamayim. V'zar shachal sa truma, a non-Kohen who eats truma also mis v'dei shamayim. V'zar sheshimesh, a zar, right, a non-Kohen who serves in the Beis HaMikdash, ultimately again chayiv misa. Tamei sheshimesh. A Kohen who's tamei, who does the avodah, also chayiv misa. Again, this is the file from the previous sugya. Remember again, the Gemara just quoted part of the brisa beforehand, but once again, this seems to be the definitive ruling that a Kohen who does the avodah in a state of ritual impurity is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Tamei sheshimesh utvul yom sheshimesh. Tvul yom, remember again, is someone who goes to the mikvah by day, but still requires hair of shemesh. He needs sunset in order to do the avodah, in order to be pure. If he does the avodah, chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Next, mechusar begadim. The Kohen is not wearing all of the obligatory Kohanic vestments. Next, mechusar kapara. The Kohen is lacking or he's tameh. It's different types of tumah tumah could require up to 3 different things. Number 1, time, duration. Number 2, mikvah, and number 3, karbanos, in order to fully affect purity. Mechusar kapara means someone who may have had the time, even gone to the mikvah, but has not yet brought his necessary karbanos. So if a person like that does the avod in the Beis HaMikdash, he is chayiv misa. Fascinating. Okay, so the Gemara says weiter. Remember again, the aloha is the first thing when the Kohen comes into the Beis HaMikdash in the morning. All Kohanim come to the Beis HaMikdash in the morning. They go to the kira, they go to the big sink, the big basin, and they wash their hands and feet. Failure to do so, and therefore doing the avodah with unwashed hands and feet, is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Shtuya yayin. If you do the avodah under the influence, right, drinks a revius of wine, chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Pruei rosh. The Kohen allows his hair to grow. He didn't take a haircut. Remember again, also these sugyas about how often a Kohen has to cut his hair. A Kohen God has to cut his hair. Melech has to cut his hair. So if a Kohen goes in with long hair, he's chayiv misa. Aval orel va'onein v'yoshev ein b'misa ela b'azhara. But if a Kohen is very interesting, if a Kohen is uncircumcised, he's an orel and he does the avodah. Or onein. Onein means, remember again, the period a person loses a relative whom they're obligated to mourn. The period between death and burial is aninos. Kohen does the avodah as an onein or yoshev. The halacha is that avodah has to be done standing up. Let's say the Kohen does the avodah sitting down. All 3 of these things, Arel, Onein, Yoshev, there's no chiyuv mis b'dei shamayim. Rather, what is there? Ella ba'azhara. There's a lav. Now, interestingly enough, Rashi points out over here, it's fascinating. What's the case of Arel? Rashi says, Shemesu achav machmas mila v'chein onin sheshimesh v'chein mi sheshimesh miyushav t'chol hanikulu kimluhu b'hu d'machli avoda. So this is interesting, by the way. You think to yourself, where would you ever have an uncircumcised Kohen? So remember again, you could have it in a situation. Now today we know that there's a condition called hemophilia. So we know, and again, obviously a genetic condition. So halacha l'maisa, let's say the Kohen had older brothers who died as a result of bris milah. So we recognize that now again, that there is an issue in the family. Such a Kohen, such a person would not be obligated to have bris milah, which is fine. Doesn't have to bris milah, but he's not allowed to do the avodah. So any of these 3 people really are not allowed. So Arel, Onein, Yoshev are not allowed to do the avodah. But if they do so, it's not chiyuv mis b'dei shamayim. Rather, again, it'll be a lav. Balmum. Fascinating. What happens if a blemished Kohen does the avodah? What's the halacha? Rebbe Omer b'misa v'chachamim omrim ba'azhara. So Rebbe says misa b'dei shamayim, and chachamim say a lav. Fascinating. Okay, so again, we'll see all of this later on in the Gemara. Good. Hazid b'mi'ila. Let's say somebody intentionally committed an act of mi'ilah. Remember again, mi'ilah is misappropriation of temple property. So let's say someone actively and purposely went ahead and took Beis HaMikdash properly and used it. Rabbi Omer b'mis. Rabbi says misa b'dei shamayim. The say no ba'azhara. It's a lav. So we'll say, so now that's our whole list. Now let's dissect the list. Number 1, hochaz atevel. So the first person in the misa b'dei shamayim lineup, first guy in misa b'dei shamayim lineup is hochaz atevel, person who eats untithed produce. So the Gemara says, where exactly do I know that from? Listen to this. How do I know that if someone eats tavel that it's chai misa b'dei shamayim, tichsiv lo yechalalu as kodshei b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu laHashem. So literally it says, do not profane the consecrated items of b'nei Yisrael that will be raised to Hashem. Future tense. The Gemara says, Ba'asidim litrom hakosov medaber. The Torah is talking about produce that is going to have tithes removed from it. What's the definition of produce that is going to have tithes removed from it? It's called tevel. And the Torah says over here, do not go ahead and profane it. And the Torah prescribes a death penalty. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Well, actually, the Torah does prescribe death penalty. Here's what happens. V'yolif, chilul mitruma. We make a gzir shava. It says chilul by tevel, and it says chilul profane by truma. V'shamras mishmarti v'lo yisu alav chet u'mesu ki chalaluhu. So it says chilul by truma. It says chilul by tevel, and we say ma'ala halon b'misa, afkan b'misa. Just like if someone who's not allowed to eat truma, whether it's a zar who eats a non-kohen eats truma or a kohen tameh who eats truma torah, they're put to death. So gzer shavet chilul to teach us that if you eat tevel, it's also misa b'dei shamayim. Incredible. The Gemara says, but 1 second, hold up. V'neiluv chilu minosar. Why don't you make it so nosar? We're going to say, what's nosar? Nosar is sacrificial meat that is left over past its permitted window. So why don't you? So the lashon of chilul also occurs by nosar. So why not make a gzera shava there and say the following: Ma lahalon bekares, afkan bekares. Now nosar is punished by kares, right? If you eat sacrificial meat past the permitted window, kares. So why don't we say that just like nosar is kares, so too again tevel is kares? To which the Gemara says, no, mistabra mitruma havele lamelaf. No, it makes more sense to learn out tevel from truma than tevel from nosar. Why? Listen to this. Shekein truma chutz la'aretz. Number one, truma doesn't apply in chutz la'aretz. So, right, truma doesn't apply in chutz la'aretz. Tevel doesn't apply in chutz la'aretz. Next, hutra. In both of these cases, there is a way to remedy the status. Right, Rashi says over here. Rashi says if it's about 6 lines up, truma chutz la'aretz, simonu zeh truma v'zeh truma meureves bo ve'ein noagim b'chutz la'aretz aval nosar noag b'midbar u'b'shas heter abam. So remember again b'chol makom. So technically speaking, this is interesting. Nosar can apply in chutz la'aretz. Now, when can nosar apply in chutz la'aretz? When there's heter bamas. When you are allowed to use personal altars, which again is a machlokes exactly when that's permitted, but when you're allowed to use personal altars, that means you can offer karbanos anywhere, which means nosar could apply anywhere. V'yesh heter li'isuro, zeh yesh heter li'isuro b'hafrasha, v'zeh yesh heter li'isuro b'tavel, u'moter v'truma, aval nosar ein heter li'isuro. Second distinction, right? Second commonality is hutra. No, right? Remember, so tevel can be permitted. How? Separate truma. Truma ultimately is permitted to a kohen. Nosar can never be permitted. Once it's nosar, it remains prohibited. Furthermore, berabim, both the lashon of chilul by tevel and by truma is in the plural, but by nosar in the singular. And berabim, pigol, shekin truma chutz la'aretz, hutra, berabim, peros, pigol, v'nosar. Take a look at Rashi. Pigol v'nosar. Rashi. So first of all, both apply to produce. So both have a plural lashon of chilul. Both apply to produce. They're both being again tevel and truma. And pigol v'nosar. Rashi says inoy lo b'tevel lo b'truma. Neither pigol nor nosar apply to tevel or to truma. So therefore, again, the Gemara says these are all the similarities that exist between truma and tevel, and therefore it makes more sense to compare or to make the gzera shava between tevel to truma than between tevel to nosar. So the Gemara says, 1 second, hold up, adrabah, but 1 second. Nosar also shares many commonalities with tevel. How so? Shekein pasal ochel. Shekei pasal ochel. Look at Rashi. Shekei pasal ochlin. Nosar v'tevel shnei and psul hamaychol. So remember again, both nosar and tevel is a psul in the ochel. The food itself, the item itself, is inherently invalidated, right? So again, nosar inherently invalidated. Tevel inherently invalidated. Rashi says about truma pasal agufu dechiya chalua b'tumas aguf ksiv. So interestingly enough, truma, right? Because remember again, we're talking about truma itself is inherently permitted, right? It's permitted to certain people at certain times. But so the Gemara therefore suggests, why not compare tevel to nosar? Because tevel and nosar have this commonality. Psul ochel, ultimately, again, both of them are inherently invalid or inherently compromised. To which, furthermore, ein lo heter, but right, furthermore again, ein lo heter b'mikvah, neither can be remedied in a mikvah, right? You can't remedy nosar by putting in a mikvah. You can't remedy tevel by putting in a mikvah. Truma, right? The case of truma, right, by the kohen who's tamei, who's not allowed to eat it. So ultimately, again, he can go to the mikvah and remedy himself. Rashi says over here. Further, it's the same Rashi. V'nosar ein lam tara b'mikvah, v'tamei truma yesh lo tara b'mikvah. Okay, so the Gemara says. So the point the Gemara is making over here is, you're making it sound like all the comparisons that exist are between tevel and truma, but there are plenty of comparisons that exist between tevel and nosar as well. To which the Gemara says, Hanach nefishin. You're right, but there are more similarities between tevel and truma than there are between tevel and nosar. Therefore, when making the gzera shav of chilul, we'd rather make it between tevel and truma than tevel and nosar. And therefore, again, that will teach me that just like truma is misa b'dei shamayim, so too again, consumption of tevel will also be misa b'dei shamayim, and not like noser, which is a chiyuv kares. Okay, beautiful. Ravina says, chilo d'rabim, chilo d'rabim odif. Ravina says, no, the truth is, the reason we prefer to compare tevel to truma, not tevel to noser, is because tevel and truma both have the lashon of chilul, profane, in the plural, as opposed to noser, which has it in the singular, and that seems to be a more compelling halachic bridge between those two concepts. All right, incredible. So the Gemara goes back to Kohen tamei she'achal truma Torah minalan, and from where do we know that a Kohen who's tamei? Right. So again, we saw on the list, a Kohen who's tamei goes ahead and eats truma Torah. Right? So a tamei Kohen eats regular truma, misi b'dei shamayim. The Gemara says minalan. From where do you know that? So the Amar Shmuel minayin leKohen tamei she'achal truma Torah. From where do we know that a Kohen who's tamei who ate truma Torah? How do we know that halacha l'maisa should be misi b'dei shamayim? So how do I know that if a tamei Kohen eats truma Torah, that halacha l'maisa again he is chai misi b'dei shamayim? D'chsev v'shamras mishmarti v'lo yisu alav chet. Pasuk says literally again, guard my guardianship, mishmarti v'lo yisu alav chet. They will not carry or will not bear any sin. So the Gemara says, Tahora in, Tamei lo. Ultimately, again, this refers to Truma Tahora and not to Truma Tamei. Amar Shmuel, Amar Belezer, Minay leKohen Tamei she'achal Truma Tamei she'eino b'misa. So we'll say, so again, this is very interesting. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, it is only if a Kohen Tamei eats Truma Tahora that there's Misa b'dei shamayim. But if a Tamei Kohen eats Truma Tamei, there's no Misa b'dei shamayim. How do I know this? Shene'emar umesu bo ki yechalaluhu. They will be put to death if they profane the truma. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Amud Beis, both sides, 83b. Prat lezusha mechulales ve'omedes. This excludes truma, which is already profaned. What's an example of truma which has already been profaned? That's truma which was already tamei. So again, so therefore, halacha l'maisa, when we speak about again that consumption of truma could bring misi b'dei shamayim, that's a tamei kohen who consumes truma tahora is chayiv misi b'dei shamayim. So remember, so our list, we're just going through our list over here, right? We are assembling our different things that fall into this category. Ultimately, again, misi b'dei shamayim. Good. Let's go back there. Let's continue the list. V'zar shachal sa truma. If a non-kohen eats truma, he's chayiv misi b'dei shamayim. It says the Gemara Amarav. Zar sha'achal sa truma loka. So Rav, interestingly enough, said, no, if a non-kohen eats truma, he gets malchus. Amr Rav Kahana, v'Ravasi l'Rav, lema mar b'misa, d'chsev v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh, ani Hashem mekadsham. But the pasuk says that no non-kohen should eat truma. So Rabbi says, so again, then the pasuk, interestingly enough, the pasuk before it says, v'shamras mishmarti, v'lo yisu alav chet umesu. So misa is juxtaposed to a zar eating truma. So why don't you say therefore that a zar eating truma should be a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim, not a lav? To which the Gemara says, hifsika inyan. No, there's an interruption. Rashi says bein mesu bo or bein kol zar. So the pasuk doesn't really flow, right? In other words, the pasuk begins ultimately with the discussion about mesu bo ki yechalu ani Hashem mekadesham, and then it says v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. So it doesn't flow directly. Because it doesn't flow directly, therefore the juxtaposition can't necessarily teach me that a zar who eats truma is going to be chayiv misa. Okay? So Marsa Mesir raises the kasha, ve'eluhin shiva misa. These are the people who are chayiv misa, zar ha'ochal es truma, a non-kohen who eats truma. So it seems to be pretty explicit that a non-kohen who eats truma is going to be chayiv misa. To which the Gemara says, no, masnisa d'rak karamis. So you're bringing up a Mishnah. Bring up a brayso that to go. You're bringing this raya to contradict Rav. So the Gemara says Rav Tanahu Upalik. Rav is a Tana, and Rav has the ability to argue. Okay, now it happens to be that in this listing halacha l'maisa we paskin that indeed a zar who eats truma is chayim misa b'dei shamayim. Okay, now then let's go weiter. So remember, Tamei sheshimish. Good. The Tamei sheshimish. If a Kohen who's tamei goes ahead and does avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, he's chayim misa. So the Gemara says, "Ki debay minei Rav Chia bar Avin minei Rav Yosef." So Rabbi said, this is the exact discussion we had before. Minayim tamei sheshimesh shuba misa. How do we know that if a Kohen is tamei and he did the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash that he's chayim misa? The chsiv daber la'aron ve'albanov v'yenazru mekadshei b'nei Yisrael v'lo yichalalu es shem kadshi. Okay. So the pasuk says, speak to Aaron and his sons, and they should be careful. They should be careful with the kachim of Bnei Yisrael, and they should not profane my holy name. So the Gemara says once again, V'yolif chilul mitruma. Wow. So we make a gzer shava chilul to truma, and we say ma lahalon b'misa afkan b'misa. Just like illegal consumption of truma is misa v'di shamayim, so too again, if a person who's tamei, kohen who's tamei, does the avoda, he's chay misa v'di shamayim. Says the Gemara 1 second, same thing as we had before. V'neilif chilu minosar. Ooh, why not make the gzer shav of chilu to nosar? And remember, you're going to both say ma lahalon karis afkan karis. Consumption of nosar is a chiv karis. So what do we say? It says chilul by nosar, and it says chilul by a kohen who is tummy who does the avoda, just like nosar is kares, so to this kohen who does the avoda betuma is also chayv kares. To which Mara says, no, mistabra mitruma habalei lemelef. No, it makes more sense to learn out the tuma case from truma. Why? The Gemara says shekain guf, because interestingly enough, both the cases of truma as well as tuma have to do again with the body of the individual. Tameh, both are a state of tuma. Mikvah has the ability to remedy it. Berabim, both have a plural lashon of chilul. So if you look at Rashi, by the way, Rashi says over here, guf tameh mikvah berabim, tameh sheshimesh, the tameh she'achal truma. So both a kohen who is tameh does the avoda, and a kohen who is tameh who eats truma, shnei psuli haguf. First of all, both of them, their disqualification is inherently in their person, right? In their person. Ushnehem psule tuma, right? Both of them are a din in tuma. V'yeshlam heter b'mikvah. Both can be remedied by mikvah. V'chilula b'lashon rabim, and they also both share the lashon of chilul in the plural form. Adrabah, b'nosar v'lei lemelef. 1 second, not so fast. Let's learn out kohen who does the avodah by tuma from nosar. After all, shekain kodesh pnim pigol v'nosar. I will say because nosar and tuma have all of these other similarities. Look at Rashi, shekain kodesh. Remember again, all of these things, right? Both of them deal with consecrated items, kodesh. Pnim, both of them deal with the inside, right, or occurring inside of the Beis Hamikdash, and both are subject to pigul and osar. To which the Gemara says, chilul durabim adif. Once again, Abba says this was attributed to Ravina before. It appears that really it's interesting that what kind of carries the day with this is we would rather compare two things that have the same lashon of chilul. That since again the plural form of chilul is used by truma, and the chilul form of tuma is used by a person, a kohen who does the avoda b'tuma, therefore again we will link them together and we will say that Allah Chalamaysa just as illegal consumption of truma, right? If a kohen who is tamei eats truma is chayiv misa b'di shamayim, so too a kohen who is tamei who does the avoda is also chayiv misa b'di shamayim. Incredible. All right, let's go back there. Tvul yom sheshimesh. Next in line, tvul yom. Remember again, who's the tvul yom? Went to the mikvah by day, but he still requires nightfall. If he does this kohen does the avoda, he's chayiv misa b'di shamayim. Says the Gemara Minalam. From where do you know this? The sign Rabbi Simai Omer. First wide line on page Gimel base 83b. Remez l'tvul yom shim avad chila minayim. From where do we know that if a kohen is a tvul yom, he went to the mikvah by day, but he still needs Hersch and still needs the sun to go down? How do I know that his avoda is unfit? Chilal minayim tamalomar kedoshim yiyu le'elohehem v'lo yichalalu. So pasuk says, "Be kadosh le'elokechem, to your God, and do not profane." Now the Gemara says, now what does this mean? Now the Pashtos is talking about Tumah. I don't need it for Tumah. So remember again, if I don't need this pasuk to teach me that a Kohen who does the avodah b'tumah is chayiv, because you already learned that from a different pasuk. Ultimately, again, use it to teach me that a Kohen who's a tvul yom who does the avodah is chayiv, or I should say, is chayiv. How do I know that it's chayiv b'di shamayim? And once again, v'yalif chilul mitruma. We make a gzer shav of chilul to truma. Ma lahalon b'misa, afkan b'misa. Just like by truma, if a kohen who is tamei eats truma, he is chayiv b'di shamayim. So too, again, if a kohen who's a tvul yom does the avodah, he is also chayiv b'di shamayim. Incredible. Umechusar begadim. So we'll say it's incredible. Again, like I said before, this past week's parasha is Tetzaveh. Right, a kohen has to wear the requisite outfit, the requisite clothing, and failure to do so. And if he doesn't wear the avodah, he doesn't wear the clothing, the begadim, and he still does the avodah, he is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. Says Gaminolan. From where do we know this from? Am Rabbi Avo, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Umatu Beimishmeid, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, V'chagarta osam avneit. Pasuk says, you shall put the belt, literally you shall gird them, I love that word. You shall gird them with a belt. Right? Avneit, the belt was one of the bigdei kahuna. Bizman shebigdeim aleihem, kihunasam aleihem. When their clothing is upon them, then their kahuna is upon them. So this is actually really fascinating, right? Because you have to really appreciate the rest of the pasuk. The rest of the pasuk is v'chagatim osam avneit, right? You should put a belt around them. Aaron ubanov v'chavash lamigbaos, put their hats on them. V'haisa lahem kahuna l'chukas olam, and the kahuna will be theirs for an everlasting statute. So the Gemara darshans, when is the kahuna theirs? When they wear the clothing. When they wear the clothing. If they're not wearing the clothing, then Allah Lamaisa, the kahuna is not. What does it mean the kahuna is not theirs? It means, the Gemara's understanding, that if a Kohen does the avoda without the begadim, then halacha lamaisa, again, the avoda is pasul. And again, in this case, so the Gemara says, V'havalu zarim, because a Kohen, listen to this, a Kohen who does the avoda without the requisite garments is the equivalent of a non-Kohen who does the avoda. And a non-Kohen who does the avoda is chamis v'di shamayim. So to a Kohen who does the avoda without the begadim, without the proper vestments, without articles of clothing, is chayiv misa b'di shamayim. V'amar mar. So and we learned that halacha l'maisa, if a non-Kohen does the avoda, he is chai misa. So we'll say it's really incredible that the kahuna only vests upon the Kohen when he's wearing the begadim, which I will say is such a fascinating idea. Why? Because on one hand, the kahuna is innate. Remember again, what do you have to do to be a Kohen? It's not like you could earn it. No matter how well you behave, if you're not in, you're not in. If your father's a Kohen, you're a Kohen. And if your father's not a Kohen, you could be the Gadol Hador. You're still not going to become a Kohen. So on one hand, kahuna is innate. On the other hand, you need the begadim in order to go ahead and do the avoda. And I think that there are two profound lessons over here. That this really is the embodiment of Kedusha. Kedusha is comprised of these two things. There's innate Kedusha, and ultimately, again, there's earned Kedusha. So innate Kedusha, every single Yid, every single Jew has Kedusha, right? You don't have to do anything. You were born a Jew or you convert into Yiddishkeit. If you're Jewish, you have Kedusha. And that's beautiful. And it's a fantastic foundation. The next step are like, what begadim, what garments do you want to put on yourself? You know, a beged represents something that I take from the world or I take from the outside and then I make it part of me, right? You know, you say like clothes make the man. Clothes are very much tied up in a person's identity. So on a spiritual level, my begadim are the actions I engage in, my accomplishments. What begadim, what am I going to wear? And if you don't have begadim, if you don't have begadim, then all you're left with is your innate kedusha. If all you have is your innate kedusha, you're a zar, you're like a baby. You're like a baby, a spiritual baby. Baby comes into this world, yeah, baby's holy, it's beautiful, fantastic. What did the baby do? Absolutely nothing. So how's the baby holy? Because every single yid has innate kedusha. But life, successful living is all about what clothing are you going to wear? What are your ma'asim tovim? What are your good deeds? What are your accomplishments? What are your chasadim? What's your tzedakah? And every single thing that you do in life is another beged, is another garment that you put on. And clothes, mamish, make the man. Clothes make us wear. And I will say, this is interesting because you have to think about it. Why is it exactly that there is such specificity regarding the clothing of the Kohanim? Such specificity. So on one level, the Sefer HaChinuch brings down, he says, because people are very taken by externalities, and we want people to come to the Beis HaMikdash and to be inspired, and they need to see the Kohen all dressed up. But I think, which is beautiful and incredible, but I think also on a deeper level, that what the Kohanim remind us is, I go to see a Kohen. A Kohen is the embodiment of like what it means to be a growth-oriented spiritual being. And when I see what the Kohen is, even though he's a Kohen, right, with no clothing, right? You meet the Kohen on the street. Right? You meet a Matzah Shabbos, he's getting pizza just like everybody else. So what happens? You're going to let him go first in line, right? Why? Because you have to give respect to Kohen. But he's not wearing the begadim, but he's still a Kohen. He's still a Kohen. Even without the begadim, he's still a Kohen because his innate identity is Kahuna. But he really only fully self-actualizes when he puts on the begadim. And I will say, it's the same thing for all of us. I'm always Kaddish because I have innate Kedusha. But do you want to become the best version of you? Put on your clothing. What clothing are you going to don? Right? And every day I decide, what am I putting on? Today is going to be a jacket of tzedakah, right? It's going to be a pair of pants of Talmud Torah. It's going to be a sweater of chesed. And every day the goal is to layer more and more and more begotten. You can walk around without clothing and you're still holy. But that's ultimately innate or conferred holiness. The avodah in life is to earn your kedusha. And the way you earn your kedusha is ultimately by accumulating your beautiful begotten. This is what the big day kahuna teaches us. Without the begadim, you're not a kohen. Without the begadim, you can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash. With the begadim, sky's the limit. Incredible. All right, let's go a little bit later. Says the Gemara. Umuchus begadim. Good, as we just did. Next. If a kohen does not go ahead and wash his hands and feet, and he does the avodah, says Gemara, where do we know this? Because the Pasuk says when the Kohanim come to the Oel Moed, they should go ahead and wash their hands, and they won't die. Okay, so we'll say, so pretty explicit. Wash your hands and feet, you won't die. Don't wash your hands and feet, you will die. One more piece. Uprue rosh. Shtuye yain. Yain b'shecha al teisht. If a kohen drank wine and then did the avodah, says the Gemara, Purei rosh. What about? So again, shtuye yain. Yain b'shecha al teisht. So the pasuk is explicit. Torah says, do not drink wine or an intoxicating beverage and do the avodah. Good. Purei rosh. How do we know that a kohen can't do the avodah with long hair? And if he does so, he's chaimiz b'shonim. Rosham lo yigalechu upera lo yishalechu. So the Torah says on one hand, he can't go ahead and shave his head, but he also can't let his hair grow long. Uksib basrei v'yayin lo yishtu. So there's a juxtaposition between wine and letting his hair grow. Iskish parua rosh l'shtuye yayin. It compares letting his hair grow to drinking wine. Mashtuye yayin b'misa, just like drinking wine ultimately again is a chi of misa. Af parue rosh b'misa. So too again, letting your hair grow and doing the avodah with long hair is also chimi. So most say so much profundity in these as well. You know, the washing of the hands and feet. The Meir Shilach, the Ishbitzer, says so beautifully. He says, why is it that the kohen has to wash his hands and feet when he comes into the Beis Mikdash? What's the pshat? It's a cleanliness thing? Well, it could be, but on a deeper level, what is it? So the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, you know, that one of the great challenges of being a kohen, I wish all of this challenge, being kohen in the Beis Mikdash, is to go to your head. And a person could easily utilize this exalted position for self-aggrandizement and ultimately to just stroke his ego. So what happens? Every day he comes and the first thing Kohen does is he washes his hands and his feet. The Rebbe says something so beautiful. The feet take you where you want to go. The hands represent how you accomplish in this world. The Rebbe says when a Kohen walks into the Beis HaMikdash, he's washing away his own self-interests. I'm going to go not where I want to go. With my feet, I'm going to go where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to go. I wash my hands. I'm ultimately, what am I going to accomplish? Not just simply what I want. I'm going to accomplish what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to accomplish. That the way that the Kohen goes ahead and enters into the Mikdash is by washing away negios, washing away any personal interests. If I'm going to be successful in this role, I got to do it for God. I got to do it for the team. I got to do it for Klal Yisrael. And I can't be doing it for me. What about, again, wine? Why can't the Kohen drink wine? So of course, on the most basic level, we could be concerned that perhaps if he drinks wine, so the mice again, he may mess up on some of the details. But there's another yesod that wine is then this, by the way, this is the week to learn about wine. But there's a profound yesod. Wine on one hand, the yain samach lavav enosh. Wine could go ahead and bring incredible joy, like it does. We know it does. It does on Shabbos and Yom Tiv, Purim haba aleinu l'tova. But when you come into the Beis HaMikdash, such close proximity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your joy should emanate from one place and one place only. And that's closeness to Hashem. There should be no external mediums to bring about joy, because you don't need it. It's a tremendous idea. We need wine at different times in life to kind of get us going to bring out the simcha. That's the nature of man. Like we saw before, sometimes we need wine to take the edge off. Sometimes we need wine to amplify or allow those feelings of simcha to come out. But when you have such profound closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't need any other external stimulants. I don't need anything to help me with that simcha. Do you know why? Because the greatest simcha in the world emanates from closeness to Hashem. That's where the greatest joy comes. And therefore the Kohen, who has the unique privilege to serve in the inner precincts, the inner sanctum of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he does not need wine to be able to find simcha. And in fact, if he introduces wine, that invalidates the avodah. Because Kohen, your simcha has to come from the pure, beautiful, and unadulterated closeness that you experience. For us also, to teach us, we're all looking for happiness. And we think happiness comes right. This one thinks happiness will come from money, and this one thinks happiness is going to come from possessions, and this one thinks happiness is going to come from career, and it's going to come from this. And at the end of the day, happiness comes from one place and one place only: closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I have closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then ultimately I have everything. And not only do I have everything, but I have beautiful, unbridled, and uncomparable joy. True simcha in life only comes from a close relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All right, the most stop over here for today. Shkoyach, everyone. Sorry I can't be there with you in person, but a tremendous zechus to learn with all of you. Have a wonderful day.